from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk, dear Lord, close to Thee.
There are a few questions that create more tension for believers than the one that we're going to talk about this evening. And that is, how should a follower of Jesus relate to the civil government? And to begin with, I want us to think about the situation with Jesus' own life on this earth, the time that he came into this world, the place that he came into this world. There are four characteristics about that place that are directly impactful on the consideration of this question. First off, Jesus lived under a time where the nation that he was a part of, the land that he lived in, was under foreign occupation. They were not really in control of themselves. The Roman government was in control of them. The Roman government had soldiers there. They ultimately were the law. And that's difficult to deal with. It was also a period of heavy taxation. Rome was expensive. The Roman army was expensive. The things that Rome built were expensive, and that had to be paid for. And so the Roman government taxed heavily, particularly those vassal nations that they had come to control. That's one of the reasons they took them over in the first place, was to get their wealth. And so he lived under a time of very heavy taxation. I don't like taxes. I think we live under a time of very heavy taxation. I don't think our taxation probably is anywhere close to the kind of taxation that Roman government imposed upon its subjects. Uh, Thirdly, he lived in a time where there were some very corrupt courts. Courts were not seekers of justice. They were not places in which the law was necessarily followed or carried out or even sought to be carried out. And that can be seen very clearly in the handling of Jesus himself, where once it gets to the Roman government, the Roman authority who was in charge knew Jesus was innocent, came to the conclusion that Jesus was innocent, but went ahead and condemned him anyway. That's about as bad of a court system as you can have. And then fourthly, there was a lot of abuse of power. And this one's interesting because it's at all levels of government in Jesus' day. The local Jewish authorities abused the power that they had. The Romans abused the power that they had. At every level, there was abuse of power. And so he lived under this time frame in which there's this foreign occupation that taxed very heavily. There was corruption of justice, and there was abuse of power all around. And yet, he never led a revolt against the governing authorities. He never organized resistance against the governing authorities. He never withdrew from society and tried to live off the grid and escape the circumstances of the authorities for himself alone. He didn't do any of those things. Instead, he taught and he lived a posture toward civil authority that is at the once clear, but it's demanding and actually a little unsettling for some folks. Tonight, we want to allow Jesus himself to answer our question. Our question again is, how should a follower of Jesus relate to civil authority? We're going to let Jesus himself answer our question in his own words and actions. And so, first, I want to turn your attention to John chapter 18 and verse 36. In, in John 18:36, I want you to notice at the outset of our study tonight that Jesus defines the nature of his kingdom. And this is fundamental to our question. When he says this, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting, but my kingdom is not from the world. And so this is the foundation of everything that we're going to talk about. Jesus doesn't deny that earthly kingdoms exist. That's the first thing we want to notice in this statement. The second thing that we want to notice here is what he does deny is that his kingdom operates under the same sphere or by the same means as earthly kingdoms. So he doesn't challenge that earthly kingdoms are there. He simply says that my kingdom doesn't operate like earthly kingdoms. And there's some key observations in connection with that we need to make here. He explicitly contrasts his kingdom with worldly systems. That's what he's doing. And then he states that violence and political force would be utilized and expected if his kingdom were of this world. If he was engaging in that kind of behavior, then that's exactly what you would expect his followers to do and what they would be doing. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting. We'd have taken up arms and we would have gone to battle to gain control and to exercise the authority of my kingdom. But as it is, he said, my kingdom is not of this world. And so he refuses to frame faithfulness to his kingdom as regime change on the earth. It didn't matter that Rome was in control. It didn't matter that the high priest was corrupted. It didn't matter that the Sanhedrin council was corrupted. It didn't matter. That had nothing to do with his kingdom, because his kingdom was not of this world. And that's really important. And the contrast here is really important, because what he says is the only way that we need to be involved in those kinds of things when it comes to the kingdom of God, the only way we need to be involved in those kinds of things, to be worried about those kinds of things, is if the kingdom is of this world. If it was, then we would be fighting over these things. But as it is, it's not, so we don't. So he removes any expectation that obedience to God requires political influence, political takeover, or political rule. Has nothing to do with any of those things. Because his kingdom is not political, he then rejects violent resistance. One of the places we see that's Matthew 26 and verse 52. This is the night in which Jesus was betrayed, which he was arrested, which he ultimately was railroaded through a kangaroo court. He was beaten, he was put on a cross, and he was killed. One of his disciples feels like they need to do something to protect Jesus. And in Matthew 26 and verse 52, this is what Jesus says: put your sword back into its place. For all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Peter's action in pulling his sword, I believe, is understandable. There was this looming threat over someone that Peter was close to, that Peter cared about. He was in danger. Peter was going to defend him. Peter had said that he was ready to defend him to the death. His pulling of his sword is completely understandable. Jesus' rebuke, however, is unmistakably clear. And what he teaches here is that even righteous motives don't justify violent resistance to authority. Peter had righteous motives. Jesus had done nothing wrong. Jesus was undeserving of what they were doing to him and what they were about to do to him. Jesus, as much as anybody in this world, was an innocent bystander who had done nothing worthy of anything that was being said or done to him. But it doesn't matter that he had righteous motives to protect an innocent man. He was told Put your sword back into its place. The misuse of force contradicts the nature of his kingdom. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this world. Fast forward to this event, or back up a little bit, actually chronologically. And when one of the disciples does pull a sword, he says, "Stop. That is not what my kingdom's about." You put the sword back into its place. That's interesting language to me, into its place. He doesn't just say put it away. He doesn't say don't use it. He doesn't say get rid of it. He says put it back in its place where it belongs. It doesn't belong here, is the point. Faithfulness doesn't include armed defense of the Messiah. Interestingly enough, what faithfulness does include is to be bold and courageous and to openly speak and confess the Lord. That Peter wasn't willing to do just a short time later. Jesus doesn't say to Peter, now's not the time. We'll get to the fighting later. That's not what he says. He says, put it away. It's not situational. It's a principled thing. It's not about personal protection. This conversation isn't. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking that this is a conversation about personal protection or self-defense or any of those such things. That's not what this conversation is about. It's about social justice resistance against the authorities and defending the innocent. And Jesus said, when it comes to the kingdom of God, that's not how we do it. Put it in its place. I would argue that the sword does have a place. God never says that the sword doesn't have a place, but he does say that it doesn't have a place in his kingdom. Jesus acknowledges the reality and the source of civil authority in John chapter 19, verses 10 and 11. If you want to go over there with me, he's here talking to Pilate. Pilate is the Roman governor that he is subject to. And Pilate holds in his hand the power to deliver Jesus or to condemn Jesus. And he has called for Jesus to be brought before him, and he is holding this conversation with Jesus, trying to decide what he is going to do with this man. And he's asking questions, and Jesus is not answering his questions. And Pilate, it says, said to him, "You will not speak to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you and authority to crucify you?" And Jesus answered him, "You would have no authority over me at all unless it had been given to you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me over to you has the greater sin." This is one of the most important statements that Jesus makes about human government. I want you to notice very, very carefully. Jesus does not deny Pilate's authority. He does not say to Pilate, "You don't have any authority over me." He doesn't say to Pilate, "You don't know who I am. You don't realize that I am God, that I created all things, that I made the world and all things in it, that I have legions of angels at my disposal, that I could call down here and wipe this, that at my word, all of this will be destroyed one day." He doesn't say any of those things. He doesn't challenge Pilate's authority at all. He he also doesn't say that the current exercise of that authority is just. That's important because it wasn't. What was going on here was not justice. It wasn't about justice. It was about political expediency. and about the preservation of the power of Pilate. But then he says something extremely important to Pilate. While not denying his authority, you know what he says to Pilate? You wouldn't have that authority except God gave it to you. Authority exists by divine permission, not moral qualification. Authority can be real without being righteous. And God's sovereignty does not eliminate earthly power, it explains it. He said, you have authority because God gave you authority. The reason why there are governments on the earth is because God ordained for it to be so. The reason why men rule is because God raises them up to rule. The reason why you exist at all is because God gave it to you to exist. The reason why I am under your authority, and I want you to think about that for a moment. Keeping in mind that Jesus was eternal God, creator of the heavens and the earth, the reason why he says, I am under your authority, is because heaven gave you your authority. That is very, very far from denying the authority of the governing bodies. And it's very far from arguing that, well, as long as they rule morally and justly, then they have authority. But if they cease being moral and just, then they lose their authority. Jesus is talking to as corrupt of a politician as exists on the earth. And he says, you have authority over me because God gave you authority over me. God's sovereignty doesn't eliminate earthly power. It's why earthly power exists. And because authority is real, then obligations to that authority are real. In Matthew 22, if you'll go to Matthew 22, look at verses 17 through 21 with me. This is a situation where the disciples of Jesus, who again, the disciples are living under this same situation that Jesus was living under. This oppressive government, the foreign nation that had come in and taken them over, was controlling them, was not allowing them to do all the things that they wanted to do, was making them do other things that they didn't want to do, was making them pay high taxes, was doing all of these things that they didn't like. And they asked him, tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? I mean, Caesar's a bad guy, right? He's a pagan. He doesn't believe in the God of heaven. He doesn't believe or practice the religion of the God of heaven. He's immoral. He's a womanizer and an abuser of men. He's throwing his weight around on the earth, taking control of people and ruling and running roughshod over them and using them for his own purposes and his own benefit. And I can come up with a million moral reasons not to give my taxes to Caesar. He's using them for things that are inappropriate. He's hosting these banquets and these orgies. He's using my money to pay for these ungodly things. He's using my money to finance his army, to go slaughter people and take over nations. I don't want to finance that. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? What law are they appealing to? Well, they're appealing to the law of God. Is it right for us before God to give tax money to Caesar? Jesus, aware of their malice, said, why do you put me to the test, you hypocrites? Now, here's what's going on. These are Jews who are asking Jesus this question. And what they're really trying to do is get him in trouble because they're thinking Jesus is going to say, Absolutely not. And now he's in trouble with the Romans. If he says something different than that, then he's in trouble with his fellow Jews. And so he, aware of what they're doing, says, "Why do you put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin for the tax." They brought him a denarius, and he said to them, "Whose likeness and inscription is this?" And they said, "Caesar's." It had a picture of Caesar on it, had his name on it. He said, "Therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." Clearest instruction Jesus gives on civic duty is right here in these verses. Some key points from this exchange. Jesus affirms the legitimacy of civil taxation. Is it right? Is it lawful for us to pay taxes to Rome? He says, "Whose likeness is on the money? Rome's. Then give to Rome what belongs to Rome." He affirms the legitimacy of what they're doing. He distinguishes between civil obligation and divine ownership. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. There are things that belong to God. By the way, you know the number one thing that belongs to God when it comes to me? Me. I belong to God. Give myself to God. He rejects in his answer the false dilemma that honoring one negates the other. He says that paying your taxes to Caesar does not mean that you're dishonoring God. He doesn't say only pay if the government's righteous. He says render what is owed. Jesus teaches willing compliance even under compulsion. Now, important words here that we need to understand. Compulsion. Compulsion means that you force someone to do something. Leo doesn't want to help me. I make him help me. Ken doesn't want to rob the store with me. I put a gun to his head and say, "If you don't, I'm going to shoot you in the head." And I compel him to come along with me. You can force people to do things against their will. What the Bible teaches Christians is that even when we are being forced to do things that we don't want to do, we need to develop the fortitude and the discipline to be willing to comply. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 39. "But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil, but if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also." There's some more exchange. It's all teaching essentially the same things. But verse 41, "If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles." I want to highlight that one in verse 41 because it is drawing directly from a Roman law. The instruction here assumes the injustice of this law. And what the law allowed was that Roman soldiers, as they moved around, could compel civilians of any stripe, could compel them to carry their gear for a mile. Didn't matter what you were doing, didn't matter what you needed to do, it didn't matter how important it was, it didn't matter how time sensitive it was. If I was a Roman soldier and I was walking down the street, I could just grab you and say, "Here, carry my gear." And you had to carry my gear for a mile. You had to stop what you were doing and walk a mile in the direction that I'm going. And Jesus addresses that reality and he addresses it directly. What does he teach? He says, don't refuse. He says, don't retaliate. He even goes further than that. You know what he says? Don't resist and don't merely comply. When they press you into service for a mile, go beyond what's required. Go 2 miles. By the way, that's not a hard and fast thing either. I don't think his point is, okay, the law says you have to go 5,280 feet. Instead, you walk 10,560 feet, but not 61. That's not his point. His point is that be willing to go beyond what you are being forced to do. You're being compelled into service doing something that is a burden to you, that is taking you away from your responsibilities and your life and your obligations that you really should have no responsibility for. But don't just do what is being asked. And we got an idiom in our language still to this day: go the extra mile. Go beyond what is being required of you. Now, this is not an endorsement of the oppressive nature of the law. That's not what he's saying, that this is a good law. It's a refusal to let the evil that's going on in the world shape your heart and control your actions. Don't let the fact that this person is oppressive and abusive cause you to be oppressive and abusive or evil back to them. Instead, choose to go the extra mile. It is returning good for evil. Remember, that's what the Bible teaches, right? Do not return evil for evil, but return good for evil. Go the extra mile. Now, this is the most important thing in all of this. Jesus embodies his teaching through his own submission to the governing authorities. We don't have time to read the story. So, Matthew 27, John 19, you can read them in their fullness and you will get a full picture of this. We just want to hit the highlights here for a moment. Jesus does not merely instruct for us to submit to the authorities. He doesn't say, Miss Sheila, you need to do what the government tells you to do, and not complain about it and not rise up resistance against them. And then he go about his life however he wants to, exercising his power and authority to excuse himself. That's not what he does. Instead, he lived it himself. Consider what he submits to. Just in the context of Matthew 27 and John 19, not in the context of his bigger life, which is even, I think, more impressive, but just in the context of Matthew 27 and John 19, he submits to arrest without cause, and he doesn't say anything about it. He submits to a trial without a defense, and he doesn't say anything about it. He submits to a sentence without an appeal, and he doesn't say anything about it. And he submits to execution without any justification in that action. And we are told point blank that he had the ability to stop that, but he didn't. He submitted to his unjust execution. He stands silent before unjust authority because of his obedience to the Father. Period. Full stop. He doesn't subject himself because of the justice of the court. There was nothing just about the court. He simply wanted to obey the Father. And so he subjected himself to all of these. And what Peter would say about all of this is found in 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 21 through 23. He says that he committed no sin, yet when he suffered, he did not threaten. Jesus' teaching reaches its climax not in his words. He taught some of these things, and he taught different concepts and different principles and different ideas about all of these things in bits and pieces. It's not in any of his words, though, that is teaching on what to do in relation to the governing authorities as a Christian. It's going to the cross. That's the climax of his teaching on this. His teaching forms a clear progression. His kingdom is not to be political. Violence is not a faithful tool of Christians. Civil authority is real and it's permitted. Civic obligations are to be fulfilled. Submission is to be willing, not resentful. Faithfulness may include suffering without resistance. God's authority is ultimate. And civil authority is secondary, but it's real. Faithfulness is measured not by our control, but by our obedience. That is a hard thing to wrestle with, but that is the fact. My faithfulness is not about what I control. My faithfulness is about whether I submit and obey. Jesus honors authority without worshiping authority. And that's a line that some people have to wrestle with as well. We have to be able to honor authority and obey authority without making the authority our God. He submits without surrendering the truth. You notice he never speaks the lie. He suffers without losing his faith. And that's the message that he proclaimed. It's also the path that he walked. Now, here's the question, the only question that matters. How are we doing in regard to these things? In my short life, about every 15 years, there's some kind of huge uprising that has taken place. Riots, bloodshed, all over some issue that somebody has with what some authority has done or is doing. Over a court's decision, over a war, over whatever. It happened in the 60s, it happened in the 70s. I don't, off the top of my head right now, remember a whole lot of rioting in the 80s. People were, well, I won't say that here. I'll talk to you after services about what going on in the 80s. But in the 90s, we had rioting again, in at least a couple of cases that I know of. I guess 2000s were a little quiet. Then it started up again. We got it going on today. How are we doing in regard to these things? Are we living up to the ideal that Jesus presented to us? Are we able to control ourselves enough to respect the God ordained authority without caving into the evil itself and retaining our faithfulness to God and demonstrating that our citizenship is in heaven and our ultimate king is on the throne in heaven? And that as passionate as I may be about some things, they're secondary and should be treated as such. Think about these things. I know it's a tough subject, and there have been brethren over the years who have taken all sorts of different positions about it. All I can do is take what's in the book, read what it says, and say, okay, how does this apply? What does it mean? And I hope I've helped in some way to enlighten what God would have us to do in relation to the lives in which we live in this world, because we do live in this world. He has not taken us out of the world. In fact, Jesus' prayer in John 17 specifically, he said he wasn't going to take us out of the world. He wanted us to live righteously in the world. And that's the goal. If you're here and you haven't been living righteously, there is one message that comes from the Bible, one consistent message from beginning to end that comes from the Bible for those of us who fall short of righteousness, and that is repent. In the gospel message, if it has to be boiled down into a single word, repent is that word. And so I urge everyone, if your heart's not right, turn back to God. If you haven't been doing right things, turn back to God, obey His will, do what is right. And if we can help you in connection with that, let it be known as we stand and sing.
I am weak, but thou art strong. Jesus, keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk, dear Lord, close to Thee. Just a closer walk with Thee. Grant it, Jesus, is my plea. Daily walking close to